You think you know Rick Grimes. You watched him wake up in that hospital. You watched him lose Lori, lose Carl, bite a man's throat out on the side of the road. You watched him lead, break, rebuild, and eventually disappear off a bridge in a helicopter. But here's the thing. The Rick Grimes from the comics, he's practically a different character. He's harder, he's more broken, and honestly, he's way more complex than anything AMC ever put on screen. In the comics, Rick Grimes lost his hand. Permanently. He became a political leader who chose diplomacy over war, and his psychological damage wasn't something the show could reset every season. It was permanent. This isn't about one missed storyline. This is about how AMC softened, sanitized, and redirected the most iconic character in the franchise across his entire journey. This is the Rick Grimes we never saw. Let's begin with the single biggest physical difference between comic Rick and TV Rick, and it happens way earlier than most show-only fans would ever expect. In the comics, when Rick, Glenn, and Michonne get captured at Woodbury by the governor, Rick doesn't just get roughed up. He doesn't get in a dramatic fight scene and have a narrow escape or anything like that. The governor sits him down and literally just chops his hand off. Just clean off. Not in battle, not in some heroic last stand. During an interrogation. It's calculated, it's cruel, and most importantly, it's permanent. Rick Grimes carries that injury for the entire rest of the comic series. He has to rely on others. He has to delegate. He has to trust people he isn't always sure he should trust. And that forced dependency, that loss of self-sufficiency, is what transforms Rick from a lone wolf survivor into the kind of leader who actually builds something sustainable. Rick literally gave a piece of himself for this world. What AMC really toned down was Rick's capacity for violence, and this is where the two versions start to feel like entirely different people. If you watched AMC's Walking Dead already, you probably remember the big moments where Rick crossed the line, like biting Joe's throat, killing Pete in front of Alexandrians, the machete scene at Terminus where he cleans Gareth's blood clean off his face like it was nothing. Those moments were shocking because they were rare. The show treated them like peaks, like Rick snapping under extreme pressure before pulling himself back to some version of normalcy. But in the comics, that level of brutality isn't a one-off. It's not a peak. It's a pattern, and the show's version doesn't even come close. Let's talk about Thomas Richards. Now, if you've watched my video on the darkest story in The Walking Dead's comics, and I'll link that right above for you, you know the full breakdown of who this man was. But for this video, what matters is what Thomas Richards reveals about Rick specifically. Quick version for those who haven't seen the video yet. Thomas is one of those inmates already locked inside the prison when Rick's group arrives. He seems harmless, quiet, and even awkward. He tells everyone that he's an accountant, but Thomas turns out to be a predator who murders Herschel's young twin daughters. And when he then attacks Andrea with a knife, Rick doesn't hold a trial. He doesn't lock Thomas up and weigh his options. He just outright snaps. Rick nearly beats Thomas Richards to death with his bare hands. No weapon, just fists, and there's blood everywhere, panel after panel of visceral, ugly, intimate violence. And it's coming from a character who we're supposed to be rooting for. The character who just a few issues earlier was talking about building a safe community. And while he didn't actually kill him, it was all there. All of that intention was right there in front of him. This is why this moment matters so much more for Rick's character arc. It's the first time he really just lets loose in that way. And it's not doing it on a walker. It's a living, breathing person. And it's not clean self-defense in the heat of the moment. It's just rage. And yeah, he did not kill him there, but he had every intention of doing so. And it was pure, primal, unfiltered rage from a man who just saw the limits of what he could tolerate. In that moment, the old world lawman dies. The man who believed in due process, in courts, in doing things the right way, he's just gone. And what replaces him is something harder, something more primal, something necessary for this world, but also something that terrifies Rick about himself. Afterward, Rick gives this speech to the group. You kill or you die. Declaration that becomes the foundation of his leadership going forward. But here's the thing most people miss about that speech. It isn't born from strength. It's born from guilt. Rick just did something he can't take back, and he's trying to build rules so he never has to feel that way again. He's not commanding the group from a place of confidence. He's trying to cage the thing inside himself that scared him. The show spread this kind of transformation across multiple seasons. The comics concentrated it into one nearly devastating, irreversible act. And that compression, that's what made Comic Rick feel so dangerously real. But it doesn't stop there, and it's not even close. Let's talk about the Hunters. In the comics, they're the equivalent of the Terminus cannibals from the show, but instead of capturing Bob Stuckey, they captured Dale. Yes, Dale is still living at this point in the comics, and they eat part of his leg. And yes, he does do the whole tainted meat thing, just like Bob did. Anyway, Rick's response in the comics is not what the show gave us. He had the group track down the Hunters and butcher them. And I don't mean they fight back in self-defense. I mean Rick organizes a premeditated execution. He knows where the Hunters are hiding. He plans the approach, and he brings the people he trusts. And when they find him, Rick doesn't flinch. He participates in directly killing every single one of them with no hesitation whatsoever, no moral deliberation, no scene of Rick staring at his bloody hands wondering what he had became. He made his choice. He's at peace with it. Compare that to the show's version, which I understand may sound similar, but TV Rick kills Gareth and the Terminus survivors in a church, which was intense, absolutely. One of season 5's best moments by far, but it was reactive. The Terminus group came to Rick's door. They threatened his people, and Rick responded with force. And mind you, this was after they had already almost slaughtered all of them in cold blood. The comics version is fundamentally different. It's Rick choosing savagery, going to them, deciding that these people need to die, and making it happen on his terms, proactively. That's a massive distinction in terms of who this character is becoming. And again, I know this might not sound like it by the way I'm explaining it, but the Hunters really were barely in the story, whereas the Terminus story at least had a season break long of time of getting to know, and they did a lot more. There was a lot more impact there. The Hunters just like popped up and then were killed. Very different approach. Now, I will give the show credit for a moment on a side note. Rick biting out Joe's throat in season 4 is a prime example of what I mean. That scene is legitimately one of the most shocking moments in the entire series, and it comes directly from the comics. Andrew Lincoln absolutely crushed that scene. But here's why even that proves my point. In the show, that throat bite is treated as the peak, the most extreme thing Rick Grimes has ever done. The moment fans still talk about a decade later. It's the ceiling of his brutality. In the comics, it's Tuesday. I'm exaggerating, obviously, but only slightly. The throat bite in the comics is one violent moment in a long sequence of violent moments. It's not the ceiling of Rick's brutality at all. It's somewhere, honestly, in the middle. It's grotesque, but it's still somewhere in the middle. The show gave us the highlighted reel. The comics gave us the full, uncut documentary. And that difference matters enormously because TV Rick oscillates. He's a pacifist in one season, an action hero in the next, a farmer for a few episodes, then back to war mode. He resets depending on what the storyline needs from him. Comic Rick just never resets. His brutality is a progression. Each act of violence pushes him further from who he used to be, and he has to live with every inch of that distance. He has to look at his son and wonder if Carl sees a leader or a monster. He has to look at himself and ask the question that drives the entire comic series: am I still a good man? That internal struggle, that constant, never-ending reckoning with himself is the emotional engine of the Walking Dead comics. The show touched it, but it never fully committed to it the way the source material did. So here's my question for you about that. Was TV Rick too soft, or do you think the show was right to hold on to him from the savage version we got in the comics? Drop your take in the comments. I really want to hear where you guys land on that one. Because what comes next is maybe the most surprising difference of all. The Rick who stopped fighting and started talking. So we've talked about the Rick who lost his hand, the Rick who almost killed with his bare fists, the Rick who chose savagery when the world demanded it. But here's the part most show-only fans never got to see, and honestly, it's the most important Rick of all. After the Whisperer War in the comics, Rick enters the Commonwealth arc, and for the first time in the entire series, Rick Grimes is actually tired of fighting. Not tired in the way the show would portray it, where he'd retreat for a few episodes and then pick up the gun again. Actually, fundamentally, bone deep tired. He's lost Andrea, the woman he loved, the partner who held him together through everything after Lori. And if you want the full story on that relationship and why it mattered so much more than anything the show gave us, I did do an entire video on Rick and Andrea's comic relationship that I'll link right above. He's lost friends as well. He's lost pieces of himself, literally and figuratively. He's looking down at one hand where there used to be two. And now he's standing in front of the Commonwealth, this massive, functioning society with tens of thousands of people, real infrastructure, real government, and he sees something that he hasn't seen in years, a future, an actual, tangible future. But the Commonwealth isn't what it pretends to be. There's a rigid class system. There's people at the top, Pamela Milton and her inner circle, who are hoarding power, wealth, and resources while everyone else scrapes by under rules designed to keep them there. It's the old world's worst instincts, really, perfectly recreated inside the new one. And this is where Comic Rick does something the show never, ever got to explore. Instead of leading with violence, instead of doing what every single previous arc trained him to do, Rick becomes a diplomat. He talks, he listens, he organizes, he convinces people that the systems need to change, not through fear or force, but through unity and vision. He doesn't storm the Commonwealth with guns. He walks through it with ideas. He builds coalitions. He earns trust from people who have no reason to trust an outsider at all. What makes this so compelling is the contrast with everything we've seen before. The same man who butchered the hunters without any remorse whatsoever. The same man who bit out a man's throat with his teeth. And now he's standing in front of a corrupt government saying, we could do this without blood. That transformation from cop to savage to statesman is one of the most complete character arcs I've ever encountered in any story. Period. Any medium whatsoever. And then there's the Negan of it all. In the comics, Rick's decision to spare Negan after all-out war leads to this extended, deeply complex relationship that spans years in the story timeline. Negan sits in a cell and Rick visits him, not once, but regularly. They have real conversations, philosophical, tense, sometimes even darkly funny in a way that catches you off guard. Negan challenges Rick's worldview constantly. He pokes at Rick's idealism. He asks why keeping a mass murderer alive makes any sense when the world has no functioning justice system. He forces Rick to justify mercy in a world that rarely rewards it. And Rick has to answer those questions, not just to Negan, but to an entire community that still wants blood. The show gave us pieces of this. The cell scenes between Negan and various characters, the eventual release, Negan's long redemption arc, but it was spread across too many characters and diluted across too many seasons. In the comics, it's a direct, focused line between Rick and Negan that never loses its tension. And those conversations are genuinely some of the best writing in the entire Walking Dead series, like by far. But here's the tragedy of all of this. AMC removed Rick from the show in season 9 long before the Commonwealth ever appeared on screen, or long before we ever got those deep philosophical conversations. So we never got to see TV Rick choose peace after spending years earning the right to choose violence. The final act of his arc is just gone. The ones who lived tried to give Rick some closure. And look, I covered Rick's comic death in a separate video that goes deep on this, so I won't rehash the whole thing here. But the short version is this. The ones who lived gave Rick a reunion story. The comics gave Rick a legacy story, and those are fundamentally different things. A reunion says you found your way back. A legacy says you've changed the world. Comic Rick changed the world. TV Rick found Michonne again. Both are satisfying on some level, but only one of them actually completes the character. And to fully understand why that completion matters, you have to look at what was happening inside Rick's head, because the comics went somewhere the show barely scratched. I'll give the show credit here. The phone calls with Dead Lori in season 3 are legitimately some of the best acting Andrew Lincoln ever did. Those scenes were raw, heartbreaking, and one of the few times the show really leaned into Rick's psychological damage. That was an adaptation that absolutely landed. But in the comics, Rick's mental instability got pushed way further than the show ever dared to go. In the source material, Rick doesn't just have one grief-fueled breakdown and then pull himself together by the next arc. His psychological fractures are ongoing, persistent. They don't heal, they compound over time in a way that makes you, as a reader, genuinely question whether this man should be leading anyone. His paranoia gets worse with each new threat. His control issues intensify after every loss. His outbursts become harder for other people around him to explain away. There are moments in the comics where Rick's own people, the people who trust him with their lives, quietly pull each other aside and wonder if he's losing it. And the uncomfortable truth is, sometimes they're right to wonder. This is what makes comic Rick so fascinating and so different from the TV version. He's not a stoic action hero who processes grief between seasons and shows up renewed. He's a man whose mind is being slowly, relentlessly worn down by cumulative weight of everything he's survived and everything he's done. Every death he's witnessed, every person he's killed, each impossible choice between bad and worse, it all stays with him. It stacks, and it never stops stacking. The show handled Rick's psychology in seasons. You get Broken Rick for a stretch of episodes, then Determined Rick, then Farmer Rick, then Warrior Rick. Each version felt somewhat separate from the last, like the writers were choosing a new mode for the character rather than building on everything that came before. The comics don't give Rick that luxury at all. His trauma is sequential and permanent, much like his missing hand. You don't get to reset Rick's mental state because the comics never let you forget what he's carrying. Every single thing that happened to this man is present in every decision he makes. When he makes a call in issue 150, you can trace the psychological through line all the way back to issue 28. It's all connected, it's all cumulative, and it's all visible. Think about how rare that is in serialized storytelling. Most characters get soft reboots between arcs. The comics never gave Rick that escape, and the story is infinitely better for it. And this directly connects to why his death in the comics hits the way it does. If you've watched my video on Rick's comic death, you know the full story. But the reason that moment is so devastating isn't just because of how it happens, it's because of who Rick has become by the time it happens. He's a man who has been psychologically battered for years, decades of in-story time. He has lost his hand, his wife, his son's childhood, the love of his life, and pieces of his sanity along the way. And after all of the suffering, after all of the compounding damage, he finally finds peace. Real peace. Not the temporary kind the show kept dangling in front of viewers for a few episodes before just ripping it away. The actual, genuine, hard-earned thing. And then it's taken from him by someone who never understood the cost of that peace. Someone who never saw what Rick carried. Someone who was too small to comprehend what Rick had built. And that version of Rick Grimes, the show could just never deliver. Not because Andrew Lincoln wasn't talented enough, of course. He absolutely was, and then some, realistically. But because the show never built the full psychological foundation underneath him. They softened too many edges, skipped over too many fractures, and pulled Rick out of the story before his arc could reach its conclusion. And I know that wasn't exactly his fault of Rick's, that was Andrew Lincoln's decision to leave. But with all of that said, let me play devil's advocate too for a minute, because I think it's only fair. Because here's the thing, I don't want to sit here and pretend AMC's version of Rick Grimes was bad. It was not. In a lot of ways, it was incredible, and I think Andrew Lincoln was born to play Rick Grimes. He brought a warmth, a humanity, I would say, to Rick that the comics sometimes just outright lacked. That vulnerability in his eyes, the way his voice would crack in moments, even the fucking snot bubble in season 7, episode 1, where Rick's composure fully broke. That's not something you can redraw on page. He made you feel Rick's pain in a way that a black and white panel just simply can't replace. And I think a huge part of why Rick Grimes became the cultural icon he is is due to everything Andrew Lincoln brought to that role. And some of the changes genuinely worked on their own merits. Rick and Michonne's relationship was powerful. It wasn't Rick and Andrea, but it was powerful. It gave Rick a different kind of leadership than the comics offered. Two warriors, two parents, two leaders learning to lean on each other in the middle of a war that never seemed to end. That dynamic was compelling, and it resonated with millions of viewers for a very good reason. The practical constraints were real too. TV is a fundamentally different medium than the comics. You have actor availability, network standards, budget limitations, and an audience that's significantly broader than a comic book readership. Not every dark, brutal, psychologically devastating moment translates well to screen, especially on basic cable, where you're trying to keep advertisers comfortable while telling a story about the end of the world. That's why you see Negan not cursing at all, as a matter of fact. But yeah, taken individually, most of AMC's changes to Rick Grimes are defensible, and I can't argue with any single one of them in isolation. But here's why my take still stands collectively. They add up to a fundamentally less complex character. Every time the show softened Rick, skipped a violent moment, healed a wound that should have been permanent, reset his psychology for a new season, it shaved off a layer. And over 9 seasons, those missing layers become impossible to ignore. They're the difference between a great character and an all-time character. Comic Rick is someone who earns his ending through suffering, transformation, and growth across every single dimension: physical, psychological, moral, political. TV Rick is great for sure, but he's incomplete. He never got the hand that reminded you of what the world took from him. He never got the sustained, escalating brutality that forced him to question his own soul. He never got the political arc that proved he could build instead of destroy. And he never got the death that turned him into a legend. And honestly, I think this is why so many fans felt like the show lost something after Rick left. It wasn't that Andrew Lincoln was gone, even though losing him was massive. It's that the version of Rick we had was just never finished. He was still mid-arc when they pulled him out. The comics completed Rick Grimes, and the show just couldn't because of Andrew Lincoln's decision. Again, not to fault him, but that's the reality of it. And think about that for a second, and let me know in the comments if you agree. Rick in the comics is one of the most complete character arcs in any medium whatsoever. I'm not just saying that as a Walking Dead fan, not just as someone who spent way too many hours reading and rereading the comics. I mean it objectively. Any medium, any genre. From small-town sheriff to the one-handed survivor, from savage killer to political visionary, from fractured mind to a peaceful leader, and finally to legend. That arc covers every dimension a character can possibly grow in: physical, psychological, moral, political, and it sticks the landing perfectly. The show gave us pieces of that, and I want to be clear about this. Andrew Lincoln made those pieces unforgettable. There are moments in AMC's The Walking Dead that I remember for the rest of my life, and most of them exist because of the humanity, the rawness, and the sheer talent that man brought to the role. But the full picture, the Rick who lost his hand and had to rebuild his identity around that loss, the Rick who nearly killed a man with his bare fists and then had to live with what he was becoming, the Rick who chose diplomacy after a lifetime of war, the Rick whose mind fractured under the weight of every single thing this world did to him, and who somehow, against all odds, still found peace. That Rick only lives in the comics. And if you've never read them, now you know what you've been missing. Now, if you want to keep going deeper on this, and I know a lot of you do, I've got 3 companion videos that covered the specific storylines we touched on today. Rick's death from the comics and why it should have been adapted. Then, the Rick and Andrea relationship that the show completely erased. And the Carl Grimes whose story we never got to see, which honestly might be even more tragic than Rick's. All 3 are linked right below here, and I put them on screen for you throughout the video. But I do want to hear from you first. What's the biggest thing the show missed by changing Rick? Was it his hand, the violence, the political arc, the psychology, or something else entirely that I didn't cover in this video? Because there is a lot I didn't cover in this video. I definitely want to hear your thoughts about that in the comics. I'm always down there. Did I just say the comics? I meant in the comments. You know what I meant. regardless, I read all of them. I'd love to see what you guys have to say about that. And if you haven't subscribed yet, be sure to hit that button down below. We're building something really, really cool here on this channel, and there is a lot more video essays just like this on the way, and I'd love to have you along the ride for all of that. But with all that being said, thank you again so much for watching this video, and until the next one, I'll talk to you later. Peace out.